This presentation examines the social drivers behind the overconsumption of clothing and the rise of fast fashion. It argues that mass produced garments combined with a culture of hyperconsumerism contribute significantly to the overextraction of natural resources, social injustice, and the accumulation of textile waste. From our reading of How Clothes Harm the Environment by Tala Tabashat, fast fashion is a business model that is characterized by a super fast turnaround of products and extremely low prices. This type of fashion has been popular with consumers because it has made new styles available to people who could not afford this fashion before. Tabashat's article highlights the dark side of fast fashion, with its more for less mindset, fueling overconsumption, harming workers, the environment, and global textile markets. From environmental hazards to social injustices, the ripple effects are devastating, especially in the global south. This leads to the fashion industry selling 80 billion pieces of clothing annually, which consumers quickly and easily discard. In the United States, 85% of all clothing ends up in landfills, with the average American contributing to a staggering 80 pounds of textile waste per year, taking an enormous toll on our planet. To highlight a few of the environmental hazards of the industry beyond just the issue of textiles and landfills, I will also touch upon Annie Leonard's discussion in her book, The Story of Stuff. This regards the environmental impacts of production, specifically highlighting the impacts of producing a simple cotton t-shirt. To start with, the cotton plant is one of the world's most heavily irrigated crops. Irrigation wastes a lot of water through seepage and evaporation, and cotton buying countries are using up tons of water outside of their borders. Consumers are essentially creating water scarcity problems for citizens in cotton producing countries. Cotton uses 10% of the world's fertilizers and 25% of its insecticides. Many of the pesticides are among the most hazardous chemicals and carcinogens in existence. These chemicals kill beneficial insects and microorganisms. Pesticides also contaminate groundwater, surface water, and animals. Now, out of the fields, turning raw cotton into fabric requires a whole array of industrial processes, including energy-sucking machines like a cotton gin, machines that bundle the fibers into bales for transportation, and more machines to undo the bales, fluff the cotton, and press it into sheets. Further processing is required before the fabric is assembled into the product, including bleaching and dyeing, where chlorine leaves the factory in wastewater, becoming a carcinogen and a neurotoxin. It also includes treatment with formaldehyde. The wastewater from these factories ultimately impact the entire global food chain. Many big brand clothing companies seek out factories that pay the absolute lowest wages. So when finally the t-shirt is ready to be made by a garment worker, it is in underlit, underventilated, and deafening factories where they work for 11 hours a day for wages as low as 10 to 13 cents an hour. The final impact to consider is its CO2 footprint. To grow the cotton for just one t-shirt, about 2 pounds of CO2 are generated, and the finishing processes add another 3 pounds. So making one t-shirt generates about 5 pounds of CO2, and that is before it goes to the store and gets washed and dried over its lifetime. Leonard's t-shirt journey now gets us to more of Tabashat's facts on consumption and its impact, such as when consumers buy more clothes, they discard older pieces more rapidly to make space for newer ones. This not only causes the landfill issues, but also has shined a light on the negative effects that clothing donations can cause. For those that donate clothing, consumers are hoping that their clothes will find a new home and have less impact on the environment. However, according to Tabashat, charities are overwhelmed by the flood of textiles and can only sell a fraction of what they receive. Only 10 to 30% of clothing donated to charities are resold. The bulk of clothes that charities cannot sell are sold to global traders who place the burden of this consumer waste on low and middle income countries that do not have the infrastructure to support it. This has impacted global textile manufacturing and markets, all but killing local textile manufacturing in many African countries. No local factory can compete with used Levi jeans that cost $3. African textile manufacturing cannot be in a fair competition with the endless bales of secondhand clothes in their countries. There, their local residents can buy global fast fashion items a few months after they were sold in Europe and North America. And what about recycling? Tabasha explains that only a small fraction of discarded clothes are actually recycled. Very little of textile waste is repurposed in a sustainable manner. When clothing brands advertise used recycled material, that material is only a very small amount of textile waste that has been created. In summary, this presentation sheds light on the deep environmental, social, and economic impacts of fast fashion and overconsumption, from the excessive use of natural resources like water and energy to hazardous chemicals and exploitive labor practices. The life cycle of a single garment underscores the urgent need for change. The overwhelming production and disposal of clothing, 85% of which ends up in U.S. landfills, reflect a culture of disposability that harms workers, pollutes ecosystems, and destabilizes local economies in the global south. These dynamics perpetuate environmental degradation and social inequalities on a global scale. Opportunities for social change lie in challenging the more for less mindset that fuels fast fashion's harmful cycle. Promoting sustainable consumption begins with encouraging individuals to buy fewer, higher quality items that last longer, while embracing practices like repairing, repurposing, and reselling clothing. Consumers can demand greater transparency and accountability from brands. We have the power to drive demand for such alternatives by voting with our wallets while advocating for stricter regulations and holding corporations accountable. Together, we can foster a more equitable, sustainable fashion industry and mitigate its global harm.